Why, hello, and welcome to Summer School 2020. I am Mrs. Donahue, though you already know that. In summer school this year, we're going to be focusing on identity issues, and the text I'm choosing to use is Shakespeare's Taming of the Shrew. Now, I know you probably started panicking the second you heard the name Shakespeare. I'd like to alleviate some of your fears. I am sort of a legit Shakespeare nerd. My master's thesis in English was on Shakespeare. So it's something that I have really good background on, and students have given me some rave reviews about how I've done it. Not to toot my own horn, but you have to sometimes to get a little trust. When we're doing it, I want you to realize that we're going to be doing a lot of interactive material. There's going to be a lot of looking at the same scene through 2 or 3 or 4 different performances. So as we kind of look ahead, there's a few things I'd like to talk to you about regarding learning Shakespeare. So these are maybe some of the frequently asked questions or the things I've noticed over the years. One is a lot of you tend to tell me that you don't understand Old English. It's not Old English, a huge pet peeve of mine. So Old English is Beowulf, and it sounds so very, very different than Shakespeare that you would have no ability to understand it. There was a terrible animated version of Beowulf, and actually the only thing I really liked about it was that they tried to have a little Old English in there. Dim harten min Aran was as close as we got, which was Grendel going Dim harten min Aran. They're hurting my ears. It's too loud, essentially. In terms of Old English, we can't really understand it. And I have a little PowerPoint of Shakespeare material that I've attached for you guys that we're going to go over, and there'll be a minor sort of quiz on explaining to you the differences in the language. Why do I say this to you? Is it to freak you out or to make you think you have to learn Old English, Middle English, and Early Modern English? No, it's because I think it's a mental block. You see Shakespeare, you think Old English, you assume you can't read it, therefore you shut down and tell me you can't understand what's being said. So Old English is like circa the year 700 to about the year 1100. Then you start kind of getting into Middle English. If my old Professor Steinberg, is watching this for some reason because she's bored, she's probably going to chastise me for saying 1100 because it might be a little sooner than that. But Middle English sets in. Middle English is Chaucer. When you hear it, you can actually hear that it sounds more like the English you speak, but it certainly doesn't look the way you understand English. And then you get to early modern with Shakespeare. The reason Shakespeare looks weird isn't because of the type of English he's speaking, but it's because of the style he's writing in. So he's writing in iambic pentameter, which is a phrase I'm sure you've heard if you've been taught Shakespeare in the past. It essentially means that he needs to fit a certain number of syllables in a line, but also that the way the syllables are spoken, this is called stressing and unstressing what I'm doing. The emphasis on the words will fall on certain beats, essentially. So to get that structure correct, sometimes he flips the structure of his sentences. He does Yoda speak, so, the beginning subject of the sentence gets put at the end or vice versa. There's also, and this freaks out students, spelling wasn't standardized in his time. Spelling doesn't become standardized in English until after the 1600s, I think after the 1700s, honestly. And again, the Steinbergs would correct me for not having that date at the tip of my tongue. But essentially, if I had the word for I, E-Y-E, right? That's how you would spell it, and you would say if I spelled it any other way, I was spelling it wrong. But in Shakespeare's time, you could spell that word E-Y-E, E-U-E, E-V-E, and then don't even get me into plurals, because you would say I have 2 eyes, E-Y-E-S. They would say eyes, they would say iron, too, E-Y-E-N. And none of those were considered wrong. And what's worse is you could interchange them. You could even start putting, instead of the E, you could actually put the letter I. There were no rules. So because there were no rules, everyone sort of did their own thing. Some of it was a little bit personal preference, some of it was regional, but that frustrates students sometimes because they're looking for consistency and it didn't have to exist, so why would it? Another thing that I frequently get asked by students are things like, why is he explaining a lot of things? So why are the speeches so long? Why are people talking about this? Well, if you were to see the Globe, which is where Shakespeare, in the later part of his career, and he was really successfully, built his own theater, if you were to see it, and even if you were to see other theaters that they were in, they are, by your standards, really plain. I mean, sure, the seating itself is decorative, but in terms of the backgrounds, you guys are used to going, even to your school plays when you have them, and seeing a background and another background, and we flip between them for different scenes. That's not exactly how Shakespeare's plays would have been done. You would have had a fairly plain background, so that if I'm looking over at a blank wall and I'm just looking at it, the audience has no way of knowing that I'm looking at a beautiful sunrise over a very big forest of green trees with birds fluttering in and out. If his actors don't, in their speeches, describe the scenery around them, we don't have any other way of visually cueing ourselves. There's nothing around us to suggest it. And also, some of you have probably read more modern plays. Maybe, maybe not. But if I were to pull you a modern play like Death of a Salesman, there would be a big paragraph, like at the start of a scene, saying, in the inside of their house, which is like faded and gray and older styled with appliances that are breaking, and it has pink curtains. Like there'd be a detailed explanation of what the people putting on the play should make the set look like in order for the dialogue to make sense. And if you look at Shakespeare, there's none of that. It's like scene, inside castle. That's it. Inside castle. Know how many rooms, know what does it look like. Infrequently, even what season is it. We get a country sometimes, but like not always anything else to go on. So when you're trying to literally build the sequences, it becomes difficult without the actors saying, like, look at these luscious curtains and look at this young lady before me. So they keep going into what you guys as modern readers consider superfluous extra detail, but they need it. Spoiler alert, sometimes once you get the feel of where you're at, you can kind of skim that part. That's not a part that I need to give you a quiz on. Like if you're just looking at the lay of the land, if you're in a room and his characters are describing who they see in a room, you don't necessarily need the breakdown of each individual tiny detail. Another thing that I don't know if you guys have noticed, because you're sophomores, and there's a chance that some of you have done a little Macbeth in middle school sometimes, maybe a little Julius Caesar, but you get like Julius Caesar, Macbeth, then you get Romeo and Juliet, then you're sophomores. Up until this point, you have only had tragedies. And if you don't get Taming of the Shrew as sophomores, the next time you potentially get a Shakespeare play as Hamlet as a senior. If you're lucky, you get Macbeth with, like me. But, I mean, in all seriousness, you only get tragedies. And tragedies, I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm in the mood for a tragedy or a horror movie. Like, I'm looking for that specific kind of emotional reaction. Like, there's a day when you're upset and you take out your phone and you find the saddest playlist you have and you go off in the corner by yourself because you are looking for emotional purging, right? Like you need to get the bad feelings out. Tragedies do that. But like schools tend to prioritize tragedies as the best of the plays. And like, that's so dark and burdensome. And frankly, Hamlet's my least favorite. Like, it's not that good to me. There'll be other Shakespeare scholars that come at me for that. But like, you guys only see sad plays. A real big reason why I'm excited to teach you Taming of the Shrew is that it's a comedy. It is a comedy. Shakespeare had 3 categories that he wrote in. Just the 3. Comedy, history, and tragedy. I teach all 3 of these, but it's always a joy to teach comedies. So in general, here's what you should know about a comedy. It's not like comedy, funny, haha, more like how you would understand romantic comedies. So in a comedy from Shakespeare, you're looking at there's always a couple who's trying to get together, at least one, sometimes more than one. In the case of Taming of the Shrew, more than one. The whole thing is they're separated in the beginning of the play, and by the end of the play, they're together. So, spoilers. In tragedies, we sort of start with everything in order and then we just ruin everything. We just go into straight up ruining people's lives, creating chaos, destruction abounds. But in comedies, it's the opposite. We actually start the play with everything sort of in chaos and needing to get fixed, and we fix it by the end of the play. So that it's like once upon a time, problem, and then happily ever after. You're looking for that sort of emotional reaction. So it's another thing that's kind of fun to do during summer school, because frankly, do you need any more like dark, depressing things in your life? You're already in summer school reading Shakespeare. I jest, you're going to have a great time. In comedies, you frequently have couples that lead. Couples are the focus of our action. They're almost always heterosexual. There's a couple exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's what they are. As opposed to tragedies where you always have a male lead character. And in these comedies, you will see some funny ha-ha humor. Tragedies break their drama with that. There's comedic relief. But in the comedies, you do actually have greater moments of like humor and wordplay. Wordplay and punning were considered by Shakespeare and his contemporaries to be like the highest form of wit. Like you weren't smart funny unless you could do that kind of writing. So I'm going to show you guys how to break that down. I don't want this video to get too long because I don't want your attention span to get too bogged down, but there's one more thing I want you to understand about my man Shakespeare. And you'll get plenty of fun facts about him as time goes on. Shakespeare invented well over 1,000 words. He invented them. Like he needed something that fit that structure that he was writing, and he was like, well, no one else said this word, so I'm going to do it. There's a certain kind of like bravery and ballsiness that goes into that type of creation. Like he's not just a good writer. He's excessively creative. He is that different than everyone around him that you don't know anyone else that wrote from that time period. That's hard to do because the only form of entertainment that was available in his time was plays. So if people were bored, as people will be, they went to go see plays to entertain themselves. That's everyone from the poorest, most illiterate people to the highest, most well-bred. So like poor farmers and like merchants who had nothing else, like people who would like sell fish and bread on the sides of streets for pennies, would still, to entertain themselves, come watch Shakespearean plays. Like that was their TV. Like that's them watching Game of Thrones. So when you're reading this, one thing that I think is really helpful for students to understand is Shakespeare was not writing to just the elite. He was writing to everyone. He was incredibly creative, incredibly self-aware. He was a great mastersmith of writing. And he did it for everyone. There's a lot of like what they call low humor in here. Like essentially borderline inappropriate jokes, funny haha. Those are a lot of things that you might not say in front of your grandma, but are here. Like sort of think of teenage boys cracking fart jokes. That level of humor is available to you because Shakespeare knew that people are people throughout time and throughout place, and they're always going to find certain things funny, and who doesn't find a fart funny? Who doesn't find misidentification of people funny? Who doesn't find, embarrassing your siblings funny? So as we get through Taming of the Shrew, there's a lot of very human moments that you guys can attach yourselves to, and don't you worry, I'm going to guide you through the whole process. Thanks for listening. This will be one of many fun-filled Donahue videos. Cheers.